I'm the director of Regulate Rhode Island. Regulate Rhode Island is a coalition of organizations, citizens, community leaders around the state that believe it's time for Rhode Island to replace marijuana prohibition with a more sensible policy of regulating and taxing marijuana for adult use. So thank you all for being here today. I also want to quickly recognize and thank some of our guests that have joined us here today in support. Regulate Rhode Island co-chair Dr. James Crowley is with us today. Rebecca McGoldrick is here. Beth Comrie, a former Providence police officer. Michelle McKenzie, a public health researcher. Maura Walsh, a representative that's going to be a big fighter for us this year, and Representative Aaron Regenberg, who's also going to be supportive of this effort. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And in a second, we'll have the sponsors of the legislation come and speak. So, we think this is a very timely issue. Massachusetts, as most folks know, did approve a ballot initiative to regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol, as well as Maine. In the 2016 election. So there's now 8 states that have passed laws to do this. Rhode Island is, looking for revenue. Rhode Island's looking to create jobs. And, not only that, this is an improvement in terms of public health and public safety. So we think that for a lot of different reasons, this is a bill that should be taken up and passed this year. So with that, I'm going to introduce Senator Miller, the primary sponsor in the Senate, and let him share a few words. Thank you so much for being here, Senator Miller.
So as many of you probably know, I've been at legislation in a very, I feel, serious and responsible methodology for over 6 or 7 years now, including a commission that studied marijuana and the effectiveness and the appropriateness of decriminalization and tax and regulate in Rhode Island. And that commission of several years ago put us on the direction of taking a very responsible stand on these issues and proposing and being successful with decriminalization and evolving into an effort that would lead Rhode Island to tax and regulate. And since then, several other states have come on to tax and regulate. I think right now we have 25% of the national population either under or ready to be under tax and regulation. So we're not alone, and those who wish for us to take it slower, I think it's time to actually take it faster, and there have been many versions of this legislation that have evolved into what I feel is a more responsible and would be potentially much more effective process of tax and regulation. To me, the issue is primarily about public safety and public health. I believe that a tax and regulated keeps citizens and young people healthier and safer. In a black market, everybody, including our young citizens, are vulnerable to accessing marijuana that might not be pure, marijuana that might be dangerous, marijuana that might actually contain substances other than marijuana that could be dangerous, unhealthy, and addictive, where marijuana is none of those. So we could save lives by doing this. Also, in a black market scenario, you have a situation where somebody could be armed and dangerous. In a tax and regulate situation, we 100% avoid that. So I feel very strongly that we're moving in the right direction and that we've done it on a slow and deliberate and responsible pace. We now have the background of both the medical and a tax and regulated market across the country, so we have enough data to also understand that there is a beneficial result as far as a population that shows that it's correlated with significant lowering the rates of opiate overdose. We know that from several studies, and as many of you know, some of my other legislative priorities and my standing on the Overdose Commission has led me to feel that these are not opposed but are actually aligned as efforts. Many of the issues that have been raised by the governor and other stakeholders are included in this bill, and that's why I think we finally have something, not only because we have neighboring states, but because we have legislation that directly addresses issues that have come up and people have asked us to address, including mandatory product testing and labeling, strict restrictions on advertising to minors, funding dedicated to the enforcement of impaired driving, tight regulations on edible marijuana products and phasing in of those products, a prohibition on products with designs that may appeal to young people, and a mandatory product review process for all edibles, and also, like I said, a slowing of those products coming into the tax and regulated system. It also allows for local control. Any community that wishes to stay in out of the tax and regulate model can stay out of that tax and regulated structure. And also, we have gotten to a point now where a very significant a very significant majority of Rhode Islanders support this effort and this direction. If we fail to pass the bill this year, we all know that we're in a situation where we will have neighboring states that Rhode Islanders could easily access marijuana, and that our black market will not go away. And with that, I believe we're passing on to Rep. Slater. Yep. And I'll answer questions after if anybody has.
Thank you, Senator Miller. And it's an honor to sponsor this on the House side and have you on the Senate side as a strong advocate and sponsor over the years. I'd like to thank everyone who's here today. Especially the folks that are behind me that have been here year in and year out fighting for tax and regulate. And thank you for all your advocacy and your hard work. And in particular, two of my colleagues in the House, Representative Regenberg and Representative Walsh, thank you for being here today. I know I have many other colleagues that are in support of this legislation, but time constraints. I'd like to say 8 states have passed laws to regulate and tax cannabis for adult use. We have had several years to see how regulation works in Colorado and Washington, and we have learned important lessons from their experience. Our legislation represents a sensible policy reform that has been shown to work successfully in other states. The number one concern that we share with opponents is the effect of teen marijuana use. However, let me be crystal clear. Multiple studies of teens in Colorado, Washington, and other states have shown that teen marijuana use has not increased in those states that have legalized marijuana for adults. There is no evidence that marijuana policy reform is linked with increased marijuana use rates among teens. We all care for the welfare of our young people, and it's obvious that our current policy only puts them at greater risk by exposing them to dangerous illegal market. Smart regulation is the best way to protect our young people. Let's just look at tobacco use rates. Smart regulation, not prohibition, has proven to be incredibly effective at lowering teen tobacco use. There is no reason we cannot use those same tools with marijuana as well. What is also crystal clear is that regulating and taxing marijuana has been tremendously positive effect for economies in Colorado and Washington. Colorado is estimated to have generated $200 million in tax revenue from marijuana in 2016 alone. For Washington, they are expected to bring in $250 million total for 2016. These numbers are exceeded initial government predictions. And we have said repeatedly when we discuss economic importance of this issue, it's not just a matter of tax revenue. It's also about economic growth and creating jobs for our residents. In Colorado, the government has issued more than 28,000 active occupational licenses for people who work in the legal marijuana economy. With this legislation, we have the opportunity to bring that kind of job growth to Rhode Island. Our fellow lawmakers have repeatedly said that improving Rhode Island's economy is their number one priority. With the prospect of creating thousands of jobs through this legislation, this should certainly be high on our agenda. If the legislature fails to take up this issue and vote this year, Voters will ask us, why are you letting tax revenue and jobs go to Massachusetts? We need that here. Any lawmaker who wants to delay passage of this important legislation should be prepared to explain to the voters why they do not want to improve the economy and raise revenue and to strengthen our budget. Our bill is streamlined to work effectively with the regulatory structure in place for medical with the regulatory structure in place for medical marijuana. This is not a heavy lift. We already have much of the regulatory infrastructure in place because of the changes in the medical marijuana. So thank you all, as I said before, for being here. I think this year is the key to passing this legislation. It's long overdue. We don't need to wait and see. We already have data, and we've seen the effects that it's had in Colorado and Washington, and it's much more positive results than what people have thought, and unregulated market isn't the way to go. So thank you.
Any questions?
They wouldn't come on the market initially, or are you saying more restrictions in place?
We would give DBR and the others who would be involved in regulation, Department of Health, the time to develop a structure for edibles that would be later than other components of the tax and regulate.
Is there anything that leads you to believe that they stand a better chance of passage this year than last or the year before?
I think there's been positive feedback off session since we last considered it. Last year we had a lot of momentum and additional support from important legislators in both the House and the Senate. We don't feel that going away. We feel that momentum actually coming with us. The data from other states and the momentum from other states, we feel also adds to that. The actual passage of the referendum in Massachusetts adds to those who are interested in the revenue component of tax and regulate, which is a part of why we both support it, but not the whole realm of the issues that we support it and why we support it. But those who are more interested in the finances see that in a situation where we have a border state that's going to be tax and regulate within 18 months, that there's an inevitable traffic that will happen between Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and whether they strongly supported it or not, it's going to be part of our commerce. And do we want that commerce to be have a Rhode Island economic benefit or not?
I agree with a lot of the points that Senator Miller had just stated. But what I will say is that overall, where it's been put on the ballot, the voters have approved it. So the general public, and in the polls that we've done in Rhode Island, are supportive of this. We can't ignore the will of the people, and they understand that prohibition is a failure and has been a huge failure for many years, and we need to move away from that model, and we need to move to a regulated market where it's healthier for everyone involved.
It looks like you're looking at a combined 30% tax on sales here. That's obviously a lot higher than what Massachusetts just passed.
I think Rhode Island, if you put all of the components, if you put the sales tax plus their excise, theirs is about 27. If we felt it was really important to pass it and to regulate it and for it to be effective with a neighboring state, we would closely monitor what Massachusetts, as we've done often in like sales tax. You saw it with the way we decided to tax liquor stores historically and so forth, that Rhode Island becomes sensitive to that traffic and sees it as something to discourage. So we would try to stay as close to Massachusetts levels as possible to not give incentive to have people going interstate to get something that they could get.
Know what the state could expect in revenue in year one on something like this?
Well, if you look at Colorado and Washington and see what they did. And Colorado has a population of about 6 million. They got 250 million. I think Rhode Island can expect more revenue than 1/6 of that, because we live in a region that's a lot more densely populated, that has, we're a smaller state with a lot more commerce between states, and it's going to be hard to regulate all that commerce. So I think we can.
Person over 21 could grow one plant, and they would have to be tagged and tracked. Is that sort of maybe a compromise tactic with some of the people who've been reluctant?
It's something that we know we're going to have to discuss as we go forward in hearings. I think Massachusetts is 5 plants. Is that right? 6. We know from the way it's been discussed over the last few years of hearings that there is a concern within law enforcement about personal growing, so we've limited the version of the legislation to address that concern.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
We're going to introduce next week. This isn't in at this point, right?
It's not in at this point. It's being drafted, the legislation, so it should be very soon that will be submitted.
This month. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.